Okay, here we are. This is day 2, Upper Black Eddy to Mountain Vista Campground. This is the back of the Bridgeton house where I stayed. I stayed there up on the second floor. And what you can't see, you'll see in a moment, is a window to the left. That's where the groundkeeper lives. There's my bike there being packed. And they were kind enough to let me store it in his corridor, in his hallway. I want to say it's about 9:30 now. I had purchased the room included a full breakfast, so the Virginia the night before has really pitched it as a good thing. It's a full menu, so I ended up, even though I got up around 7, I stayed for the breakfast and to take advantage of it since I paid for it, and you know, why not enjoy it? And that bridge there goes back over to Milford, and I walked over. I got around 7, and I walked back over and got a cup of coffee, took the town in, tried to see it during the daylight, and just kind of enjoyed it a little bit. Here you can see, here's a picture crossing the bridge over to Milford, and there's where I got the coffee at Bridge Street Bagels. That's at the end of the street, and there's the bridge crossing over. Bridge Street you'll just hit as you come into town on the Jersey side, and there's the fruit cup. And so I got on the road about 9:30. Okay, this is River Road in New Jersey. Crossed over, there's the Delaware there. It's a beautiful day, probably in the 50s. There's some hawks, I presume, up in the sky there. I don't think you can see them. Just stopped to put my helmet on because even though this is I was hoping to keep it off, but there are cars on this road, although they're very sparse, few and far between, but they come by pretty quick. So I'm just entered Holland Township. Cars speeding along, 2 of them. Looks like they're going to slow down for me, which is nice. A little wider road here. Okay, here we are. We've turned on to not lower, but old. We've continued on Old River Road. It's more residential and farms. We're away from the cliffs now. I made a left turn off of Old River Road. Holland Township. Here's Delaware. And a lovely picnic table. I have a feeling this is private property. And that's the way I'm going, up to the water gap. Stop the pipeline. We are in fracking central. Alright, I gotta come out to the main road for a little bit here. So I'm just leaving Holland Township, that sign says back there. Because it says entering over there. So we just dropped down close to the river, past the bridge, the Reckinaw Bridge or something, I don't know, but this is still Old River Road, which I believe will take me all the way up to East Stroudsburg. But look at this cool engine that's been abandoned. Long Island Railroad. Wow. I wonder if anyone's ever used it for a photo shoot. Private car. Wow, that's very cool. At Phillipsburg, I went down Main Street, which reminded me a bit of your typical working-class Jersey town. I will mention that after Phillipsburg, there is virtually no support or amenities until Belvedere. If you want to grab a bite or replenish your supplies, this would be the time and place to do it. Farmland. Looks like it's all corn from last year. Jersey corn. But it's just more or less private property. The river's still over there, probably in those past those trees, and I think there still might be a railroad track over there. But this goes from like this and then to residential, not really residential, but homes, but not necessarily farmland. Probably in the 60s, rolling up and down hills. Bit past Phillipsburg, I decided I would stop at Belvedere for a light lunch before crossing back over to Pennsylvania for the balance of the trip. I found a great lunch spot with lots of character. Thesilidos Eatery on Front Street. Sorry if I'm getting that wrong. I spoke briefly to the owner, at least I think he was the owner, and he mentioned that there used to be quite a few bicycle tourists a few years back because the place next door, I believe, was a hostel, and it had since closed. Okay, here we are on the Pennsylvania side now. We've just left Riverton, Pennsylvania, across the bridge to Riverton from Belvedere, New Jersey. But this is a much more, still pretty isolated road, but not as residential or farmland as the other one was. But look at that, Delaware River, that's so beautiful. All the roads have been in great shape in terms of their surface, but I just wanted to show you the Pennsylvania side. Most of the drivers
Actually, pretty much all of them have been courteous. Pennsylvania does have a 4-foot clearance for bike riders. Still on the Pensy side. I just did a relatively brutal uphill climb. Wasn't too long, thank goodness, but it's the most hill I had since I've been here. Going to meet my father and wife in East Stroudsburg, PA. So, and then tomorrow, hopefully a ride through the park. As you can see, it's a pretty isolated road, in good shape. A couple school buses with some traffic behind them. So I've been pulling over for that since it's been so sparse. But as I said, drivers have been pretty courteous. You have these residential houses, and then they have access to the river. Little beach.
Once you get to the actual water gap, there isn't really much to see because one has to hike up a trail to see the scope of the gap itself from above. Just after you enter the park, there are a few observation points along the road, but to be honest, one can't really see much because of the flora. I was on 611 for this part of the journey, and there were points where there was no shoulder. The old stone retaining wall was collapsing, and they had moved in those concrete K-rails. The problem was that the addition of the K-rail took up the shoulder on the road and made me have to use a whole lane. There was a welcome center at Interstate 80. From there it was into the Delaware Water Gap Village, which was a welcome site and had a nice vibe. I still had about 6 miles to make it to the campsite at Vista Mountain Campground where my dad had arrived the night before. I have to say my timing on Route 209 was the worst experience. I had been spoiled by nice smooth rural roads, but 209 had cars whizzing by at 65 miles an hour. Although it had a shoulder, it had the typical debris that we find on high-speed roads like this. I just wasn't used to it and did not enjoy it. I think I made it to the campground by 5:30, chatted with my dad and his wife for a bit about the journey and took a shower. We went back into the village for dinner at the Sycamore Grill, which I would recommend if you want a nice sit-down meal and a good atmosphere, and had a well-deserved beer and a burger. Afterwards, it was off to bed.